The United Nations has defined digital inclusion as equitable, meaningful, and safe access to use, lead, and design of digital technologies, services, and associated opportunities for everyone, everywhere. Digital inclusion is enabled by human rights-based, intersectional, and whole-of-society policies and multi-stakeholder approaches and actions. For digital equity, we need to address these three main pillars: affordability, financing, and internet governance. To a large extent, the digital divides that we have today can be plugged by addressing these. If we have affordable technologies, affordable digital access, funding options, especially for the emerging and developing economies, to a large extent, we would be able to address this problem of digital inclusion. And when I say affordability, it is not only the smartphone or the computer or the pad that you are using, the tablet computer, which to a large extent has become affordable. It includes all the internet-enabled devices. Today we see the trend of smart devices. Anything and everything becomes smart. To make them affordable is another challenge. Today, every aspect of human life has been influenced by the internet. In fact, today, internet is probably the most important and critical infrastructure that we have. With respect to the governance of the internet, even today it is controlled by a select few. Yes, there is civil society engagement. There is civil society representation in the various mechanisms of internet governance, be it ICANN or the Internet Governance Forum or the Internet Society. But it is a token and a very inadequate representation. Today morning we had a launch by the Honorable Governor of the GLIDES Alliance. The GLIDES Alliance is the Global Alliance for Internet Governance, Digital Empowerment and Security. We have already got 23 countries on board this initiative, and we hope that this will become a harbinger for change to be able to plug this gap in terms of the involvement of civil society in all these governance mechanisms. Without much ado, we have a superstar galaxy of distinguished panelists today. They come from diverse backgrounds: government, industry, entrepreneurship, development, and of course, the civil society. I'm pleased to read a very short bio of them. First, our own C20 Sherpa and Representative Ambassador Vijay Nambiyar. He's a former UN Secretary General Special Advisor and former Deputy National Security Advisor to the Government of India. He was the Chief of Staff under the UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon. And he was involved in several initiatives, path-breaking initiatives of the United Nations. A very warm welcome to you, sir. We have an entrepreneur par excellence, Mr. Pradeep Gupta, an angel investor and a mentor to several folks in the startup ecosystem. The main promoter and chairman of the Cyber Media group of companies, an industry veteran of 40 years in the IT industry. His awards and recognitions are numerous. I'll just mention a couple of them. The National Entrepreneurship Award by the Ministry of Skill Development by the Government of India for mentoring and hand-holding several aspiring entrepreneurs and startups in our country. A very warm welcome to you, sir. I'm very pleased to also welcome Mr. Ravindran, the MD and CEO of the WealthMax group of companies. He dons many hats in the company, having run it for the last 2 decades. WealthMax has won the Rajiv Gandhi National Quality Award And he has also been a board member of the MDRT, Million Dollar Roundtable India, and many more initiatives to help the startup and entrepreneurship ecosystem. A very warm welcome to you, sir. I'm very happy to welcome a mentor of mine whom I've been associated for more than a decade, Mr. Satish Babu. Mr. Satish Babu is a free software activist, early internet advocate, and development professional based out of Kerala. He is the founding director of the International Center for Free and Open Source Software, which is a governmental body of the state government of Kerala. He also has his own software setup, In-App Technologies, where he serves as the president. His connect to the internet governance mechanisms, to the multilingual internet governance mechanisms has been immense. He has been holding several positions, international positions, in professional societies like IEEE, Internet Society, ICANN, and the Internet Governance Forum. And of course, the Computer Society of India, where we had started our association. I also want to add that he has been of immense help to us as a strategic advisor for the Glides Alliance that we launched today by the Honorable Governor. A very warm welcome to you, Satish sir. Last but not least, I'm very happy to also welcome Ms. Felista Aku, Senior Partnerships Manager of Afri Labs, a pan-African network of over 400 innovation hubs across 52 countries. She has served in several corporate positions and also about supporting youth empowerment and small business, especially by female founders. We're very happy to have you with us, Ms. Felista. Very warm welcome. So I'll request each of our panelists to go the first round, give us some, an opening statement of 5 minutes. I'll start with you, Satish sir.
Thanks very much, Prashant. I'm Satish, and I've been a volunteer in multiple international and national technical societies and fraternities. Right now, I'm going to talk about internet governance and the multilingual internet. Now, India has actually achieved a kind of revolutionary success in several aspects of digital India. We are all using these things daily, UPI and the CoWIN platform. Now, the magnitude of the success can only be appreciated when you realize that India is the most populous nation on earth, which means all the solutions that we make for India has to work at that scale of 1 point whatever billion. That is not a simple achievement. How did that happen? Now, this is because of a thing called digital public infrastructure, DPI, and digital public goods. And at the very center of these, basically these things like Aadhaar and the UA, there are some building blocks of the DPI. These have been engineered in such a way that they can interoperate and become building blocks for higher level things. Like CoWIN uses multiple of these, or UPI is also foundational technology. Now, at the center of all this is the internet. As Prashant was pointing out, we do not know much about how this internet is governed globally, because it's a global resource, it is borderless, it's permissionless. You can actually, this jurisdiction of countries don't apply. So then who runs it, or who maintains policy, who creates policy, who manages it? It's actually an ecosystem of organizations. And there is quite a bit of merit in what Prashant was saying, that India, given all its size, is not so well represented in proportion to its size. So there's a need for people to be aware of who's running the internet. These organizations work on different things. ICANN, which is the Internet Corporation Assigned Names and Numbers, works on domain names, IP addresses, and protocol parameters only. It doesn't look at cybersecurity as a broad thing, although a part of it may be related to cybersecurity, for example, DNS abuse. If you take IGF, it's a much broader kind of a thing, but it is non-binding. It's a UN dialogue forum. We can discuss anything there. It's open to everybody, but it is not binding on any governments or anybody else. Then we have the Internet Society, which is, I'm not going to get into details of all this, but the intermeshing of these organizations is what keeps the internet going. And these are all open, mostly open organizations, but there are invisible barriers to participating in them. For example, if you can go to ICANN meetings, then you can participate. But these meetings are in different places, it's very expensive to travel, so that there are these invisible barriers. So how does a country like India ensure that we have adequate representation which is comparable to our size. This is something that we have to work on, and I'm sure this alliance that has been launched here today can look at how civil society can participate, how civil society can influence decision and policy on these matters. I'll stop here. Back to you.
Yeah, thank you, Satish sir. Pradeep sir?
Sure. So, you know, on the issue of affordability and financing, there was a panel just before that, and I think there was a discussion on that, on both those issues, and some very good recommendations came out there. So perhaps you could pick up those recommendations from that particular panel. But broadly speaking, it was that can we have technology as a service, the right to repair, the necessity of having some kind of an information repository, you know, ensuring that there is a alignment with the SDG goals. So those were some of the points that came out here. Let me talk now about internet governance. Let me first start with one aspect, which is the security aspect. And I think all of us sitting in this room are equally responsible for that. Okay. We give a lot of lip service to security, but when it comes down to reality, when it comes down to brass tacks, we do very little about it. Perhaps it's an Indian trade of, you know, that there is an afterlife, there is a second life, and so on, that we say that is janam mein nahi hoga to agle janam mein hoga, right? But we don't bother about security. I'm including the corporates also in that. We are very lax when it comes to internet security, and I think, you know, to the people sitting here, except for, let's say, an antivirus, do you have any other security software on your computer? Not even a single hand. On your mobile phone, except for, you know, the cleaner which is there, do you have any other security software? There is one hand. Okay. Two hands. Okay. All right. Three now. So, you know, that is the kind of an importance that we are giving to this particular area. And I think that needs to change with each and every one of us. Okay. And it has been, I'm sure you must have seen Jamtara on OTT, and you know what is the kind of extent of scams that are possible. And indeed, those scams are happening. All right. Today there was a talk of $6 trillion being lost from the economy, and it is happening with individuals, with corporates, with governments, at all different kind of levels which is there. Coming to the internet governance, yes, there is an inadequate representation as far as India is concerned, and that needs to increase. But also now, wearing a media hat, there is also this big issue which is of what is true, what is a fact, and what is fraud. Okay. And there has been endless debate which has been going on about this particular area with no solutions right now in sight. All right. Because on one hand you have freedom of speech, and on the other hand you also have that, you know, what is a fact and what is fake. So that is a big debate, and should be one of the things that should be on the agenda as far as this area is concerned. And of course, as far as the legislation is concerned, we are far behind in terms of having adequate legislation which is available to be able to take care of the various kind of things which are happening on the internet, including from the scams or the fake news or whatever is happening. The legal infrastructure is very weak to handle that, and I guess this will remain at least for several decades, because technology is evolving very fast with newer and newer things. You know, you have AI, ML, and then, you know, AR, VR, and robotics, and 5G, and, you know, so many new technologies which are coming up, which are going to keep on changing the way we interact, the way we do different kind of things, and the law will be 2 steps behind. So, you know, with that, I'll stop and perhaps come back later on.
Yeah. So we would love to hear the international perspective, Felista.
Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Doctor, for having me, and thank you to your team for the amazing work that you're doing. I'm happy to be contributing particularly to this conversation around digital inclusion. And I stand here representing the interests of over 400 ecosystem builders in 52 African countries. And nowhere is this subject matter more eminent than in Africa, right? And I would like to talk about the first two, that is about affordability and then funding. I remember in 2021 when the pandemic broke, and the civilized countries were having a hang of it, just finding a way to manage it, the lockdown and all of that. And then I don't know how many persons were really thinking about people in rural communities and how they were navigating the uncertainties that the world had found itself in, right? So when we talk about digital inclusion, I like the fact that in the inaugural session, one of the things that came out strong was the fact that technology cannot replace the parts of empathy, compassion, and all of that, yeah. So when we talk about digital inclusion, what comes to mind for me most of the time, I am thinking about the vulnerable. And when we talk about vulnerable people, different stakeholder groups comes to mind for different people. But for me, I'll be thinking about people in rural communities. I'll be thinking about women. I'll be thinking about children. I'll be thinking about people with disability. So how do we ensure that these people have access to digital tools? So having access to the hardware is one thing, and being able to use them is another thing. I remember recently we were having a Zoom meeting, not Zoom, WhatsApp call for a family meeting. And then, my brother was trying to talk and my mom was busy doing something else. We're like, mute your mic. And she's like, where do I mute the mic? Where am I? So she has the tool, but then being able to use it becomes another thing. One thing that we as AfriLabs have done over the years is that we have served as a convener, because we understand that the work of digital inclusion is not such that one stakeholder group can achieve, right? It's not something that we can leave to the government alone to do, or enterprise support organizations alone to do, or corporate entities or policymakers alone to do. It's something that requires a collective effort, right, from all of the stakeholders, which is something we really do well at AfriLabs. So when we talk about affordability in Africa, it's really not easy, right? Cost of internet is very high. Cost of power is high. Just recently I was talking to my colleague, I'm like, am I the only one that pays this much for power? How much do you spend on power per month? And then when she told me, I'm like, oh, okay, so it's everywhere. So if for someone like me in, so to say, urban community, is not finding it easy with the cost of power, then you can think of, how much of a burden it would be for people in rural areas. So it begins to, come on me that how do we begin to subsidize all of this, right? Cost of internet, cost of, hardware, whether it's PCs and, phones, and then we begin to look at the capacity building aspect of things at the grassroots level, where these guys are able to use the resources that have been made available to them.
Yeah, thank you. So actually you're talking about democratizing the technology. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Sir.
Thank you. So let me say that I seem to be an interloper in this group because I'm not a specialist at all. My being in the UN doesn't, of course, necessarily make me knowledgeable or even be able to speak with any authority on internet and inclusion. But I might just say that digital inclusion has been on the agenda of the international bodies and of the UN. UNDP, for example, has talked about the 5, canons, as it were, of inclusion, that is availability, affordability, adoption, protection, and awareness. Now, these are issues which, when any kind of internet situation in any society, will have to be addressed if they are to, in a sense, if the people are to be digitally empowered. And that, I think, creates problems because, as I think you've just mentioned, whole parts of Africa are excluded. And if you're talking of digital inclusion, it makes, it's almost tragic to say that, you have almost half the population of the world is completely excluded. And in fact, even though we say that 85% have mobile phones, but that does not necessarily mean that they have access to the internet. And that is so totally different things. And they say, also it is said that some of the major sort of, let's say, in order to bring in affordability, even to set it up, the costs of the price of affordable digital care, it says, for billions of people is estimated at around 2.1 trillion. And they cover an entire sort of, clutch of issues like reaching digital skills, a pipeline for that, enhancing trust in technology, and developing digital solutions in key areas. Now, these are things which, in fact, you'll have to work on if you are to think in terms of digital. And this will inevitably entail international partnerships. Now, partnerships can be for business, and much of it is for business. People don't do things for free, generally, internationally. How that can be worked out, there are certain sensible, and as I think Prashant has mentioned, there are sensible avenues which are already in sort of under discussion. These are the things which need to be, in a sense, upscaled and brought within a certain, let's say, ambit of reasonableness from the point of view of the vulnerable countries, and particularly the countries that are not able to afford it. Many of the, let's say, major private sector partnerships, which are now, as for climate change, increasingly people are looking at the private sector to be able to finance much of the, let's say, the projects for digital inclusion. How do they work on it? There's this talk of ESP. Now that may work, may not work. How far it works, one doesn't know. But it is being used. The whole thing is to develop newer and newer avenues of being able to bring these essential kind of facilities, these essential appurtenances of a digitalized world for digital inclusion. And that, how you do it, particularly in the poorer countries and the LDCs, is going to be critical. Here, as between the North and the South, this is going to be a major, I think, preoccupation for the G20 and the C20, how you build up principles. Obviously, the questions of governance have been already raised, and I think in terms of how you build governance too, again, the voice of the developing countries, I think the point was raised that India, being the most populous country in the world, has not as much voice in the corridors of power, as it were, as applied to internet governance as it should. Of course, a country like India will probably be able to, in a sense, almost gate crash its way if necessary. And I don't think it'll be even. I think it will be unrealistic to think that India can be excluded any further. But it's not so much India as a question. It's the question of the format in which this kind of regulation can take place. And I think that is where the discussion will take place. And we need to be imaginative and at the same time as inclusive as possible. Thank you. I think we're moving this. That's right.
Om Namah Shivaya. I particularly would like to thank Dr. Krishna Shri for giving me an opportunity to be present here. I came from Bangalore. I find this panel to be very knowledgeable and born before the computer era. Most of us. I call it BC. So. No, so you are an exception.
Is an exception.
You are actually bringing us into the median age. Yes. But much as I would like to say, considering that there is a very young population in this audience, I find that I would like to give some bit of humor, if you permit me, and also bring about my own personal life and experiences as to how I have seen technology changing. I began my career in General Electric, and those days I was the executive assistant to the managing director, which is a very enviable position. And the first important job that was given to me was to get the computerization of the factories and the branches and integrate them. This was a Herculean task considering the fact that I first got to go to Calcutta to get it done, which means that it is the most difficult task to convince people that your job is going to be retained. And most of the younger generation who are here, I think today it's at your fingertips that you use everything and you're able to get the information, knowledge out quickly. But those days is very, very difficult. The first most important thing is to enter a computer room itself was a no entry board, which would actually stark at you, and it would tell you that you got to take out the slippers like going to a temple and walking in. This is how things have been. So today things have changed, and more importantly, those days we used to look at the capital expenditure involved in technology upgradations. Digital digital was not a subject at all used until the Modi government came in, and the financial aspect donned the biggest role in terms of decision making. So it was the question of protecting an employee from losing a job to whether to have a computer system or not. This is the most important thing. Then I went into the financial services arena, where much of the workload used to be happening again through manpower with so much of documentation that computers never had a say at all. So therefore, much of the banking system that we try to see today, building up non-performing assets, could partly be because of that also, because nobody had controls as to what happened. Giving away money was important, and government also tried to advocate the philosophy that more and more loans should be given through what is called a loan mela and all that. These things have even gone away from the political manifestos of most of the political parties. Then comes an interesting phenomenon that I came across in 1995-96, which was what was called a BlackBerry. And this is a wonderful phone, and which used to be larger than my palm itself, and it, after a few years, did not work well, so I gave it to my driver. So he was walking past the Chepauk Stadium in Chennai. I was posted there for 6 months. Somebody asked, what is the score now? So they thought that was a transistor. So this is how the technology has undergone such an important change that today I'm able to clearly call the shots as an entrepreneur and also the president of the Bangalore Chamber of Industry and Commerce in terms of getting technology as the first most important measure to decipher success. So from survival we have come to revival, and now there's a big sugar rush is how I would like to speak about. So it has become of strategic importance, and management quality is also considered most relevant only when the company is well enabled. The speed has become something which is so ubiquitous. In my own view, the financing is the most important, easiest task that we have today. Affordability, each one of us can certainly afford. And then when it comes to internet governance, I think our company is our country is fairly stable. Much more is desirable. I would possibly end the conversation saying that yesterday is a cancelled check and today is cash.
Yeah, thank you. So I'll start the first round of questions from, I'll just flip the order, sir. So first I'll ask you. So, in terms of policy, as you said, technology is moving so fast, but neither policy or legal mechanisms have caught up. So what do you think would be the way forward? How should we accelerate the policy inputs so that we can catch up with the technology?
I think the government has certainly been able to up the ante very well when it comes to financial frameworks. The private sector is certainly working quite hard and hand in glove with the policy makers. I think the missing gap is coming from possibly the bureaucracy in terms of getting it implemented to the next stage.
Thank you, sir. Nambiar, sir, basically in terms of the United Nations agenda, you were talking about, a lot of digital haves and have-nots. Now, in terms of mechanisms at the UN, even the Honorable Governor was talking about the Indian success story. I wanted to add a point about Jugaad. There is a word called Jugaad in the lexicon in India. That is frugal innovation. I mean, India has been very successful in many use cases of Jugaad or frugal innovation. How can we take that to the world?
I don't know. Oh, this is right. Is right? Okay. Now, I don't know if you can use the word Jugaad in the context of the present situation regarding digitization and digital India. Jugaad was actually, in some ways it is almost a pejorative kind of word. It's something to make, to a fix-it kind of thing,
Yeah.
which doesn't actually have much sustainability.
Right.
Digital India is what we are going to do cannot be anything if it's unsustainable. So it has to be sustainable, and therefore it would have to be much more than Jugaad to get there. Now, the UN at the same time is in fact incorporating digitization, bridging the digital divide in the overall context of sustainability and the sustainable development goals. So there is really, I think, we need to make a step change in terms of attitude in regard to how to move in that direction. And I think it is already there. I don't see in the present policies, either of internationally as in terms of the Secretary General's call for digitization and the digital divide, nor in that, for that matter, in the case of each of the steps taken in terms of digital India. The first, in a sense, I am surprised, and it is a sign of the, one would say, technological coming of age or the evolution of India away from this Jugaad culture, that you are now seeing them build a very conscious, an architecture which is very carefully thought out in terms of bringing out the unfolding of digital India. And I think that what you need for, therefore, in whether it's an international context, in the UN, or in terms of countries which need to be, in a sense, working to digital inclusion, is first of all leadership. And I think that kind of leadership we have seen in India to a large extent, and I think we'll need it increasingly in countries that are aspiring to be among the front runners. And I think it is being shown increasingly in many of the developing countries. There is, of course, the critical absence of finance and funding. There too, it is for forums like the C20, the G20, to be able to find that kind of funding to bridge the gap. But ultimately, it is the mixing of leadership at this level and a kind of building of a much larger sense of commitment within the international community to build constructive and effective partnerships that will build this.
Yeah. So, Felista, so you were telling me, you were alluding to the fact that you've connected with so many countries, so many CSOs across Africa. So, how did you build that awareness in these places in terms of, your Afri Labs initiatives and so on?
Thank you. So basically, these innovation hubs that we have in different countries are responsible for supporting entrepreneurs and innovators in their local communities to scale their businesses, but then also they have various interventions for young people. It could be just general digital skills training, it could be STEM education for young people, it could be coding classes during the holiday, right, for children. So for us, our hubs are already doing this, but like there is no hub typically that would ask a startup or an entrepreneur to pay for all of these services. So these things are, okay, I've been told that nothing is done free. So when you get something free, it means someone has paid for it. Yeah. So most times they deliver these trainings to these young people at no cost. And trust me, a lot of resources goes into running a hub, from power to internet costs and all other infrastructural provisions that they have, right? So it still brings me back to, we need to leverage partnership, right? We need to come together, public-private sector collaboration, to strengthen the work that the hubs are already doing. We are seeing, trickles of private sector organizations coming up to do certain things. I was communicating with Alison. I didn't realize she was from Intel. I'm still going to meet her to say, oh, you're our partner. So last year, for example, we worked with Intel to carry out a research, mapping out AI deep techs in Africa, and then the result of that research is now feeding into another program that we're currently trying to design for deep techs, right? So how about we have a lot more private organizations and public institutions coming together to say, let's focus on specific communities per time, and then we design specific interventions, and we targets X number of people. So we could say, for example, let's look at Kenya, right? How about we impact 1,000 women with digital skills within the next 6 months? And then at another time, we go to another country, another market. I was speaking with someone and I said, we've had conversations for quite a bit, and how about we begin to take baby steps into, bridging the digital gap, right, that we've been talking about. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So my query to you is, cyber laws have been, you are talking about, all of us are responsible for security. Absolutely. I also wanted to add there is nothing called privacy. That's the new adage that we talk about. Now, cyber laws have been in vogue for quite some time. Have they not been effective policy, instruments?
It is because technology is changing and moving far rapidly as compared to the legal systems.
Not catching up.
No, not catching up, and therefore there are new things that happen, and therefore there is a new law that is required, and so law is actually trying to play a catch-up game in this entire thing, and that is the reason why legislation has been far behind, and even policing has been far behind.
Right.
Because of that particular reason, that a cyber crime happens, the police themselves are inadequately equipped to say that we don't know how exactly to react to this kind of a situation. So and you are absolutely right, data privacy, I didn't touch upon that, but is something which is also a very important issue and that now needs to be resolved. Who does the data belong to?
Yeah.
Right? Does it belong to me? Does it belong to the carrier? Does it belong to the app on which it is residing? Does it belong to the nation? Does it belong to, and in what way different players in this entire thing could possibly use that data? So again, you require some kind of an international consensus on these issues.
Yeah. Satish sir, I wanted to ask you, you were talking about the success of UPI. We are now talking of the India stack. The India stack can be offered to all United Nations countries. So where are we on that front?
Yeah, so the digital public infrastructure that we talked about earlier is basically a set of components which have the ability to work or interoperate basically and deliver at the scales we are talking about. The scale is enormous, you're talking about 1 billion plus. So to deliver consistently at that scale requires really kind of good engineering, and the India stack was called India stack later. Initially, piece by piece, they appeared, they interoperated, and finally, when it all kind of gelled together, they called it the India stack. And now the India stack is ready to go outside India also. There are efforts under the G20 to take out India stack and take it to other countries. The only issue is that it requires the databases. For example, the India stack depends on the Aadhaar database. That's a foundational piece. Without that, nobody can make it work in their country. So that means they have to kind of go through the whole Aadhaar process there again. I'll just make another point on the fake news. Yes. If you want Aadhaar to be replicated, you need political will, and a lot of that. So Pradeep mentioned fake news is a big issue. I agree it's a big issue, but it's got, what it does to society. It actually kind of creates all kinds of issues within society. But there's an added problem now that ChatGPT has come. ChatGPT now simply takes off your data. Now, it doesn't ask permission. So the question that was just raised as to whose data is this is very pertinent, because ChatGPT simply takes off information from Wikipedia, from Reddit, from 100 other sources. Now, imagine what will happen if fake news was not removed. Then what will happen is, since ChatGPT takes a snapshot of the internet at any point, the fake news also will feed into ChatGPT. It will change the narrative. It has the potential to change the narrative. So that's a very dangerous thing, and that is all the more reason why we should, kind of counter fake news. Back to you, Prashant.
So I think we can have a couple of questions from the audience. Yeah, Apurva. Please give them.
Thank you so much. Wonderful discussion. I just had a small suggestion. In terms of digital inclusion, you've mentioned 3 pillars. I live with a disability myself. I think if you were to add accessibility and universal design to that, it will strengthen the entire argument even further. So that's a submission.
Yeah.
And it goes beyond people with disabilities. I mean, just the other day I was at a train station when there was a ticket vending machine, and you saw a long queue of people with a person manning the ticket vending machine. That's not the kind of IT jobs we want to create, a person manning a ticket machine which is supposed to be universally accessible. So that's just a submission for you folks.
Yeah. Thank you, Abdul. Yeah. We can have one more question from the audience.
Good evening, sir. I am Professor Jayaraman from Business School, Amrita University, Coimbatore. So my question is, what are the effective methods of taking technology to remote villages in India, where you got maximum underprivileged people? So they are not enjoying technology at all, as she has mentioned already. Even in most of the remote villages in India, they do have phones, but they don't have internet. That's the real problem. So what are the effective method to bring the technology to the underprivileged people? Of course, the simple technology I'm talking about, not the advanced one. Thank you.
No, it has to be advanced technology, but in a very simple manner. Okay. So BharatNet, of course, is one project through which internet was going to be taken to all the villages, and there have been plenty of villages that have been connected through fiber, and that is one way. But the latest technology that people are talking about is satellite communication. So you have the LEOs, the low Earth orbiting satellites, and you create a mesh of low satellites, and you can reach remote areas, and the cost per GP of LEOs is far lower than the fiber connection also. So, fiber connection always has this problem about right of the way, where you can dig, where you can't dig, and so on. So all those have to be done. But this LEO will then get into whether it is a jungle, whether it's a snow-clad area, whether it's a desert area, all of those would be accessible through this mesh of low Earth orbiting satellites, the LEOs. So that is the next thing, and there's a lot of work which has already been going on satellite communication.
Yeah.
Adding on to that, there is of course the infrastructure element of what you describe is usually called digital divide or digital inclusion. So apart from the infrastructure, which is improving all the time, steadily, there are also other gender barriers, income, education, disability. These are all kind of barriers that prevent access to the technology. India has one additional barrier, which is also very important, and this is language. India has 22 languages and 15 scripts, and the level of support is not all that good in some of the languages. That's another thing we have to address. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. I think we are running a little behind schedule. I think we had a very, exciting discussion. Some of the keywords I see in terms of takeaways is collaboration, partnership, sharing of best practices, responsibility, awareness. I think these are the keywords that we take from this dialogue, this plenary session. And the civil society working group of technology, security, and transparency will take, factor all your valuable inputs towards the policy draft that will be tabled for the G20. Again, I take this opportunity to thank all the distinguished panelists. I request our C20 working group coordinator, Dr. Krishnashree Achyutan, and our member, Alina Stefan, to present mementos to our distinguished panelists. Ma'am, first to Ambassador Vijay Nambiar, sir. Of course, he's part of our own family, he's our Sherpa, but still, please put your hands together for... Yeah. Ravindran, sir. Ma'am. Alina? Give it to Satish, sir. to Pradeep sir. And Felista, of course. Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you.